Streaming has outperformed radio for 5 years. Labels are reorganizing their teams and refocusing their marketing resources. We're going to talk about what this means to you when we come back. Welcome to Music Industry Cities Tuesday Talkies, where we discuss what's going on in the world of music business. I'm Peter Schwing, and joining me as always, my co-host Sam Tall. If there's something you want to chime in about something and something you want to discuss, hit us in the comments, join us in the chat. We're here. What we do is after we run the segment and that closing credits, we magically reappear. And if you're in the chat over on Twitch, over on Facebook, over on YouTube, you can join in the conversation. So let's get right into this. So there is a lot that has been going on with radio and streaming, and it's like vying for that attention. Where can you get exposure? What this means for the future. We had Adam Lewis a couple weeks ago that we talked about radio and streaming, and there's some latest news articles coming in. And one of the things that we saw here is in those recent articles, there was a great quote by Alan Kovac. Radio is all about the passive audience, the one that commutes and is in the car 2 or 3 hours a day. And who knows how long that will last as we work more and more from our homes. And that's really important foundation to understand what we're looking at when we're talking about radio, as in terrestrial radio, and then streaming and digital radio. So let's go to Sam Tall with his thoughts on this. Sam, hey, what's up?
Hey, Peter. This is such a fun one to talk about because it's like everything that is the culmination of last several years of what we've been talking about.
Right. And this is that change. I mean, if you go back to 2007, 9, 11, 12, and when we had the crossover between physical product and digital,
Yep.
And then you had digital product, and then you had streaming. So now, and we've seen this coming, but streaming versus radio. And you sent over some great articles, and we're going to put those in the show notes below. But we're one of the big other takeaways is also, as one of the articles say was well, there might be 60 or 80 programmers, and this isn't terrestrial radio, across the country that are making these decisions. That's going to whittle down to somewhere between 20 or 30. So one point that I'm thinking is you have less people controlling what gets played.
Mm-hmm. I mean, that's like the iHeart / Cumulus / former Clear Channel / whatever.
Mm-hmm.
It's all robo DJs now programming the national listening taste because top 40 is top 40 everywhere you go.
Right. And college radio is still important because it's kind of a little different. It's an outlier from regular terrestrial radio in that sense. But I know you got a lot to say, so take it away.
So one of the things that struck me about this whole thing is that it's not remotely new, yet it's being talked about like it is. I remember at the beginning of my career, I worked at Downtown Publishing, which at the time still had Downtown Records, and Downtown Records famously had the first single that went #1 with no physical product, and that was Gnarls Barkley Crazy. Great song, but it was kind of like a bellwether for what was to come. It was sort of the big hello for iTunes being the dominant force for however long, and that was in 2006, I believe. But at any rate, that gravy train didn't last very long. It was 5 to 8 years, and Downtown Records doesn't get a whole lot of talk about these days. Downtown Publishing sure does, because they've moved around, adapted with the changes of the industry, become owner of distributors and pub admins alike. And it just kind of points to where the value is, right? And it's in streaming now. We all know this, but what we seem to keep forgetting is that radio is competitive with streaming in a lot of ways and not complementary. It was the case previously that if you didn't own the music, you didn't have the CD, you didn't have the tape, whatever the case may be, you could listen to the radio, find out what was coming new, find out what was popular, what you had to drive down the street to go to the store and buy the record, right? Well, now you can just listen to Global Top 50 or Viral 50 or New Music Friday or Discover Weekly or Release Radar. Everything is now at your fingertips. And I like this notion that radio is somehow for the commuters. Radio is somehow for the people who, still drive their cars long distances. Obviously, living in Los Angeles, I can see cars outside my window, and people could be listening to their radios this whole time, except what they're probably listening to is Spotify on Apple CarPlay or Android Auto. It's not radio anymore. Like I don't get into a rental car ever, or any car ever, and put on the radio. And maybe that's generational. I'll admit, maybe that's generational. However, I also think there's a cultural and technological shift where if I'm paying money for my streaming and I know that the streaming is going to know me uniquely better than the radio playlist is, like, sure, maybe I want to listen to classic rock radio, or I could listen to Spotify's classic rock playlist, which may be semi algorithmic in that it's part curated. It's 300 or 500 tracks, of which 100 or 150 get served to me based on my taste preferences. Like, this is where we are, and I don't understand anybody who's still saying like, "Oh, well, we should continue to nurture radio, and radio is still a great place to break." That's true, but this, it isn't sort of this, be all end all as part of the marketing campaign. And Peter, there was something else that I sent you. It was a report from Media Research, who I love. I think they do amazing work. Mark Mulligan is brilliant, and his team are doing amazing things for the industry. And talking about how marketing in this era, how the fan funnel ought to work. And what I noticed about it is that it kind of played contrast to this Variety article about radio that Alan Kovac was quoted in that, like, the major label system historically, I mean, you probably have some experience with this, especially talking with all the label heads and other industry figures throughout the conference space that you've been in, that, like, they very much play one trick for their marketing, right? Like, the marketing campaigns revolve around a single object of fancy, and whether that's spending all your money on wining and dining radio programmers for decades, and then having to pivot to wining and dining, record store owners, or FYE and Virgin Records and Tower Records, and wining and dining the merchant buyers at those stores. Or now it's getting really cozy with playlisters, and the age of the marquee playlister, your Tuma Basa, your Mike Begane, like, that's kind of waning because all those folks are getting kind of undermined by the algorithm, even internal to their own shop, Apple Music and Spotify. So now we're at this point of the new fancy thing, of course, is TikTok, where labels are investing a buttload of money into marketing records on TikTok, but also signing stuff straight off of TikTok. And that's not necessarily a new thing, because that's the same thing that happened with Vine. It's the same thing that happened with YouTube. It's the same thing that happened with radio, record stores, everything. The thing is, it's the age old game of let's do one thing and exhaust the hell out of it, and then keep doing that one thing. Right. And I think that is probably the most damaging way to proceed with any marketing strategy. A good friend of mine, Charles Alexander, and another good friend, Dustin Boyer, we like to say in the Artist Managers Connect group on Facebook, we like to talk about that streaming or playlists are not marketing. Playlists are not your strategy. If all you're talking about is playlist marketing, and Charles and Dustin come from this space of helping overall marketing campaigns that have a core of streaming and playlisting, but they now have kind of expanded their own business service offerings outside of just the streaming plugging space. If all you're doing is streaming marketing, it's no different than if all you're doing is radio marketing, or if all you're doing is TikTok campaigns. It cannot be one thing. I think this is where independent record labels get it right. It's also where independent artists get creative. Is you have to be in multiple places. You have to do multiple things. You have to find the fans where they are, and they're not all in one place. In fact, for some artists, they may not be in the key places at all. There are going to be artists where none of their fans are on TikTok. And so if what you're doing is doing TikTok campaigns instead of maybe leaning into a Bandcamp, Friday sale day, or whatever the case may be, or record store day, if you're, in the independent records and vinyl space, it's like, if what you're doing is TikTok campaigns, you're going to lose from day one. And there's no reason why you should be investing in that if you just know better already. So I've had the fortune of working with some bands that have, signed some pretty lucrative deals with major labels, and a couple of things that were obviously less lucrative with independent labels, but you have pride in it more so than perhaps the major label side. And I've seen what these marketing conversations go like. And as a manager, I obviously get a lot more say in the matter when it's an independent label or a distributor than it is with a major label. And I've told this story, I think, in the past on this show, but certainly to some friends of mine, where I remember walking into a really long, release strategy meeting with a major label, and telling the artist, pulling him aside at the start and saying, so here's what's going to happen. They're going to say this, they're going to do that, they're going to say this in response, and then we're going to have this meeting and we're going to walk out feeling some kind of way. And after 7 hours of meeting with every department in that full day of meetings, he said, wow, you hit it nail on. Like you predicted every single thing he was going to say, as if you could see the future. It's like, yeah, because I've done this before and it's not different any point in time. Every single time it's the same. It's so freaking frustrating. And I just wish, this is my key takeaway here, is I wish that all artist teams, all marketing would just think about the fan wherever they are, all the different ways that they are, and not focus on any one platform, not focus on any one medium, but focus on the product, focus on the artist, and focus on growing the relationships across the fan base, no matter what that means, but definitely not just trying a one-size-fits-all approach. You do kind of have to reinvent the wheel just a little bit every time.
Right on. I have a bunch of notes here. So yeah, a lot going on. So let's take it back. Let's take it back to the old school.
Sure.
And talking about radio.
I wish I was there.
Yeah, exactly. When you had like radio, it's like, the offices, when you're not in a major city like in New York or Atlanta or in LA, when you're out there, it's, radio is always just like the old boombox that's dusty and dirty and nobody would want to touch it because it hasn't been cleaned in 10 years. And that's what's sitting in the office on the top of a filing cabinet. And that's what people are listening to. And it's usually one or two stations. And they're trying to be as neutral as possible on the station. So you're not going to get the hard rock station. You're going to get what would just been like, AAA radio kind of.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember years ago, and this goes back, I don't even know what we're talking, 7 years now, and when you look at like when Pandora, and going back to your rental car, and Pandora made that deal with Ford to get into all of their cars. So it's like, that's the dashboard. Then USB, you can play your Spotify. Then it became, now you can just do Bluetooth. So now your playlist, so, and again, generational. And this goes back to somebody at iHeart once said to me, it's like, when they talk about specific radio stations, they're like, we're not, Peter, we're not tailoring this towards you. We're not putting our programming to you in this market. We're programming this market for the 65-year-old woman that has to go to the grocery store and she's only going to be in her car 20 to 35 minutes on average. And we want to make sure we're entertaining her and giving her the music so she will enjoy, so she doesn't change that station. And we can roll some ads in there. And that's basically it. But you take a look, and I've been listening because I've been on Long Island lately and driving, so I've gotten more of a dose of radio than. And I can tell you, Fleetwood Mac wrote 4 songs. Stevie Nicks wrote 2. Billy Joel wrote 9 songs because, of course, because it's on Long Island. Elton John wrote 4, and Bruce Springsteen wrote 3, and that's my day. So,
and it's such a concentration of just like the nostalgia trip for that kind of a thing too.
Mm-hmm. And even it's like, it doesn't matter that I'm not listening to the golden oldie station. I'm not listening to the classic station. It's like, here's the hits of the 70s, 80s, 90s, and today. And it's fun. I don't mind like hearing some of it because I'm just going to the store really quickly. But when you go to the store and every time I get into the car, I'm like, the way the rotation always seems to cycle for me is I'm just listening to the same performer every 4 hours when I'm in the car. So let's now look at this, what we're going on to with the services. And one that in the article in the Variety, and this is going to lead into the technology and the changing of what you were saying is, you had John Fleckenstein from RCA say most labels have the playlist streaming team housed in that commerce team because it's attached to a commercialized account. But as playlists get more and more developed, there's a promotional aspect. What we have
Mm,
found is that it's wrong to apply our structure to the world. As playlisting and curation evolves on these platforms, so will our team. So, adapting to the changing landscape from a major label, which has always had a little more difficult of a time,
sure.
turning the ship. But you look at it's like the playlisting team is part of the commerce team.
Yeah, I mean, like, I get that there's a debate about whether streaming counts as a sale or as a broadcast or a rental or whatever the case is. I mean, like, anybody who's tuning into the UK Parliament hearings is hearing that question repeatedly now. But it just seems so obviously not any one of those categories that we're used to. And so to preconceive of it as this, like, oh, well, it's a sale or it's a broadcast. It's like, well, it's neither a sale nor a broadcast, really. It's also not really a rental in the sense that it's like you have to forfeit this at some point. You just permanently have access as long as you keep subscribing. So then, it broadens out to like what is Netflix and how do we account for all this sort of media shift. But ultimately, it just, I get the prestige value. If you're in the top 5 on New Music Friday, that's going to have a direct revenue benefit. That's going to be very, very impactful to the sales revenues of that record. If you have a top 5 on the radio, it doesn't mean shit for the record label other than, it might end up with more streaming now. It used to mean it was going to end up selling a ton of records. It means a lot for the songwriters and the publishers, which is still super critical and super important, but it's almost like, why don't the publishers do the radio promo instead of the record labels? Like, I feel like they could, if RCA was really concerned with
Hmm.
how they, slotted their radio promo team, their radio pluggers, and that they should just migrate them from RCA, Columbia, and Epic and move them over to Sony Music Publishing.
And that's a great. It's like, why isn't publishers pushing the radio? I mean, labels have always been anti-radio, going back to 1920 something, when radio and music started to be playing on the radio format. Labels forced their artists to sign a contract or revise their contract, and it was a take it or leave it. You are not allowed to have your music played on the radio because they feared that it would infringe upon sales. Well, what little did they know that it really boosted sales. But we are one of 3 countries in the world that terrestrial radio, does not pay the performers. It only pays the songwriters. And the other countries
Right.
on top are North Korea and Iran. So we're in good company with those other countries out there,
Our best
So
friends.
yeah.
I think it's just so telling that on the one hand, that wasn't preconceived. There's just the laggard of the music industry, the record labels being behind the curve of technology. It goes back 100 years. It's not just like they're behind the ball on streaming and they're trying to knock down Napster, et cetera. It goes all the way back to the inception of broadcast radio. But then also the fact that they keep trying to claw it back for the last several decades. And the radio lobby is like, oh no, it would sink our business model, blah, 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 blah. It's like, yeah, every decade we have the same conversation, we have the same
Mhm.
thing. Eventually, terrestrial radio, as we know, is going to continue to slip. The issue is going to be moot. Sound Exchange is going to collect from digital radio if that continues to be a thing versus Spotify and other sort of algorithmic mix, kind of listening. I think the problem there is going to solve itself. And like, I understand the prestige value of getting radio play. Like, listen, I want radio play for my artists too. It's part of our marketing
Mhm.
campaign, but it's part of the overall campaign, which
Right.
first single, maybe we go to radio, second single, maybe we go to playlists, third single, we're going to try something else. Maybe we're going to go TikTok. And then for the album, we're going to kind of all bring it together.
I mean, and you go back in different, like in the part of the marketing. I mean, people. I remember when it was like labels. They were like, "All right, how do we put sync into our marketing campaign?" Like,
Hmm.
but sync isn't a marketing campaign. Sync should be on just like just revenue side, as opposed to what's a marketing campaign for sync. Oh, so now we're sending out a team to go pitch music supervisors.
Yep.
It just becomes all that. So I do want to bring this over into the um, media research article, and I looked at
Sure.
it, and again, the links are in the show notes, and they had that funnel, and honestly, I really I think they do amazing work. I don't agree with that funnel that they were talking about on this one.
Okay.
I just looked at it and I was like, I have to look in more, and because I can't explain exactly what it is, but I do want to touch upon the things that you were saying there. Um, they talk about like the prediction, like, many of the services are designed to help harness the fan community model, and like I'm not going to list all the companies that they're talking about, because smart marketing platforms. Um, they will gain success by playing a key role in enabling fan first marketing strategies.
Mhm.
Where have we heard that before a million times? Be they for the artist directly or via picking up more projects being outsourced by labels. I don't know necessarily too much on that. I mean, a lot is coming in house. You see a lot of the
Mhm.
acquisitions that have occurred. The same goes for creative digital agencies that are focused on knowledge sharing and co creation with artists, as well as marketing strategy and execution. I'd like to see the definition of what co creation is and how that is shared within, taking a slice of the pie. Where does that fit into the pie?
Right.
And where does it fit up front and on the back end? These growing real community oriented and cooperative music sites offer new types of distribution infrastructure via curation spaces. And I really hate this line: curation spaces, not unlike Pinterest for musicians. Are, are we at?
Gross.
Are we at the?
Gross.
Are we at the? It's the Uber of. It's the Uber
Yeah.
of. And here's to tie this together with what you were saying is about, like, doubling
Mhm.
down and just like oversaturating. What we have been doing as an industry as a whole on any social platform, on any media platform, it's new service, let the kids figure it out, get
Yeah.
in there, find the formula, oversaturate, find the next new platform, rinse, repeat. So it
Yes.
becomes every platform. And what happens is, like, okay, the cool kids are in there, the underground is in there, like, the independents, they still can't they can't get that backing, the funding, because they aren't a top tier artist. So they're doing it and they're seeing results. And then all of a sudden it's like everybody's like, oh, yeah, look at that. Here's a whole bunch of money to throw at it. Now it's oversaturated and it's plastered with the same exact thing you saw on the last platform
Mhm.
that was launched last year.
And it's not even the platforms that are like consumer end audience platforms like your TikToks and your Vines and your YouTubes. It's also like the business platforms. So if you notice things like we talked to Jeremy Gruber about Foundy, right? Foundy is a great tool and it served a lot of people well. And then it got acquired and it's going to be integrated into a suite of tools and it's going to be still be valuable, but it's not going to be on the market anymore. And we've seen things like Next Big Sound that, kind of got acquired by Pandora and then wound down. And a lot of the companies that were providing API access to Next Big Sound to track the data ended up cutting that access because it was competitive with Pandora and it would have opened Pandora up to having access to proprietary info or creating competitive advantages. I mean, it's this routine, even with Spotify playlists, right? Like we see these playlist networks come up like Digster and Filter, and then they get acquired by the major labels as a vehicle for in-house promotion and plugin. Right. So it's a routine, like you say, rinse, repeat. What works? What are the independents doing really well? What seems to over-index and allow things like the 1975 and Dirty Hit to become a phenomenon? And then how do we get involved with that? How do we acquire their company, their intellectual property, their methodology, and then exploit the hell out of it until we exhaust it fully, you know, in the most gruesome way you can think of as far as a tech platform.
It's always been fascinating to try to understand why the music industry hasn't figured out a way to create, like, hey, let's all go in on this platform that is built for us, around us, and then we can share a lot easier. I mean, of course I know the challenges. Intellectually, I know the challenge, but it's almost like it is going to be somebody eventually that's going to say, and you know what's going to also be? It's going to be blockchain. I'm telling you this now, okay? Once we
Okay.
can
All right.
once we can take out some of the middlemen out of that chain, you're going to see a whole new ecosystem open up,
Sure.
okay? Because the secondary market remuneration all this stuff that is coming, and that's the big thing about blockchain, is because it's going to take some of the middleman out. That ties in your marketing, that ties in because of these smart contracts, and it's going to be a lot easier to track and understand where it is and being able to access data. So
You know what's really
that
fun
is a
about that access and data piece is like you said, everybody talks about like putting fans first or artist marketing or transparency or
Mhm.
use your data, power your marketing, blah, 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 and then gets, acquired and integrated and, made secret and like everything becomes proprietary and murky. And then it's no longer transparent and fan first.
That's why blockchain is going to work, because it's decentralized and you can see this. So and I'm not saying, I'm not one of those like, hey, it's going to fix everything.
Right,
Definitely
right.
not. It's going to create a whole set of new headaches, but it will fix some things, and it's going to open up different opportunities. I mean, going to NFT, so I don't want to get into like that whole deep dive there, but the fact is that the labels, the industry has always been, can't figure out, say, how do we invest in a
Mhm.
platform that we can create that'll work. I mean, they tried it with like when Napster was out. The labels, major labels, did come together to try to put together an MP3 platform. They just didn't know how to do
Mhm.
it because they were so behind the curve, because they were so anti what's going on. But it's a different era, and the fact is, there can be something that go all in, instead of going all in on Spotify and
Mhm.
investing in Spotify to get them going. And that's just a completely third, different, outside organization that, just because you're investing in it doesn't mean they're going to listen to you.
Right.
It's, why can't there be something of a centralized platform that can grow as labels, and you can create an ecosystem within it, as opposed to another company that's, you're fighting for those fractions of a penny.
I feel like Vivo was kind of an example of what happens when the labels come together and partner with an organization to make something occur
Mhm.
that ends up being a very valuable driver of engagement on the fan level. And of course, that took advantage of the fact that YouTube was still very new and very fertile ground, and now it's incredibly competitive space. And I, work in that space regularly, and I see how competitive it can be, and how Vivo as a platform and as a brand has kind of been subsumed by a lot of the initiatives that YouTube has done. Again, just because you're a stakeholder in a thing doesn't mean that that thing has to listen to you all the time, just like with Spotify. Now, I don't have anything to announce, but I do want to say that I am working on something that I hope will kind of help address this. It's something that's near and dear to my heart from an independent manager perspective. And I think there's a lot of great ideas circling the drain that could potentially just get sucked under. And one of the things that I want to be a part of, and anybody who's out there watching and listening, feel free to get in touch, and we can always go back and forth about this kind of a thing in particular for whatever projects you're working on. But I do have my fingers in the pie on things that are of the sort that it's like, here's how we build a relationship with the fan. Here's how you build a, recurring revenue around your audience that isn't necessarily just reliant on individual interactions or individual transactions, but is, monetizing the relationship. And it's not just give me money, I give you thing. It like, which some Patreon platform users are kind of like, or even to some other kind of transactional platforms like Bandcamp or even Etsy, where it's like, I'll send you a thing if you pay me the money for it. It's much more about like, what is a fan getting out of this relationship with the artist? How do we create safe limits so that artists don't feel like they're completely exposed and lose every semblance of privacy? But how do we make sure that we bring a closeness and a personal connection that then is very valuable to the audience, as well as very valuable to the creator? Um, you know, like you mentioned, it's no one thing. It has to be a bunch of things, and it has to be, very transparent, and has to cut out some of this, middle party that thrives on creating murkiness in the data to keep their moat and keep people
Mhm.
thinking that they have value when they don't necessarily have value. They just shuffle the money around.
Right on. And I think we're going to wrap up with that. I think that's perfect time to end scene. So thanks, Sam. It's been a fantastic discussion. All right, and that's going to be it for today. Thank you all for tuning in. If you want to continue the conversation, leave a comment below. If you like what you're hearing, hit that follow, like, subscribe, whatever that button is, whatever platform you're on, and ring the notification bell, learn about new shows. And you can also find us at musicindustrycity.com, where you can register there for free and find out all the other events and the other things that we're doing. There's so much going on, and we're doing some VR stuff. So there's a lot going on. That's all I can say. So thank you again to my co-host Sam Tall, and have a rocking day. Peace.